This is a video of my testimony in 2017 to a Senate subcommittee looking at farmland ownership issues. I was somewhat nervous going into it. It's a really important issue. It was an important issue then, and it's still an important issue, and I'll be interested in keeping up with this particular one over time. So here's an oldie, but a goodie.
Now on to Mr. Deaton from the University of Guelph. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here today. This is a timely topic as we have just surveyed more than 2,000 farmers, and I will bring some of the insights from that survey to this discussion today and leave information that I talk about with Kevin after I'm done. Also, the other data that I'll talk about is in 2 reports that are up on my website, and Kevin will provide you with a link to those. I'll now briefly overview some of the key macro forces that influence farmland prices. I'll often refer to Ontario in my discussions because that's where my research is, but the insights I think are generally applicable throughout Canada. I'll also discuss farmer concerns about non-farmer ownership of farmland. And finally, I'll give a brief overview of the suite of policies that can influence who can own farmland, and I look forward to discussion and providing additional details in answering your questions. Farmland prices have been increasing at high rates. The Municipal Property Assessment Corporation estimates that between 2012 and 2016, the per average increase in the overall values in Ontario was 16%. One major factor driving farmland prices over the last 10 to 12 years has been the low interest rate environment, that was mentioned earlier. This is a widespread phenomena and has influenced asset values in both Canada and the United States. Even a conservative estimate of 2 percentage point drop in interest rates would be expected to have a large and positive effect on the price of farmland. The rise in farmland values also depends on the return to farming, and this depends on both the price of outputs and inputs. Emphasizing the former, in 2012, corn prices soared to close to their double current price per bushel. From then to now, our surveys from Ontario suggest that rental rates have also appreciated. The combination of higher rental rates, which is a proxy for the net returns to farmland, and the low interest rate environment is consistent with our experience with land appreciation. I think it is important to keep in mind that the variation within the provinces in terms of both cash rents and farmland prices are substantial. To illustrate this point concretely, I'd like to draw from a very recent survey that was conducted with farmers in Ontario. The median reported rental value for a tillable acre in Perth County was $300, but $150 in Wellington County. The price per tillable acre, according to our survey of farmers in Perth, was $18,500, while it was $11,500 in Wellington. These differences are likely to reflect differences in the productive character of the farmland, some of the issues that were raised in your previous discussion. Let me also add, particularly in terms of Southern Ontario, that location matters. In Southern Ontario, near the GTA cities, farmland prices are likely to reflect future non-farm development uses. A great deal of research suggests that proximity to urban areas places upward pressure on farmland values. Finally, though I do this with some caution, we can use some of our recent results of Ontario farmers as a bit of a crystal ball. In our recent survey, the majority of farmers thought farmland prices would remain the same over this year. 35% thought it would rise, and only 8% thought that the farmland values would fall. I want to briefly address concerns associated with farmland acquisition. At the outset, I should note that there are 2 sides to an exchange. Hence, buyers and sellers are differentially affected by farmland price appreciation. Whereas farmers and farmland owners selling land benefit by price appreciation, farmers seeking to purchase farmland are discouraged by the higher farmland prices. The issue of who owns farmland and non-farmer acquisition of farmland is important to many farmers and farm groups. The National Farmers Union, for example, emphasizes the need for farmers and local families to own farmland. I have heard similar statements from farmers when giving presentations throughout Ontario. In this regard, let me raise a couple of issues that might be helpful to you. First, this is a historic concern. In documenting the early history of agriculture economics in the United States, Paul Barkley writes of an early session that was put on, I quote, to address the rapid increase of the system of land renting and the absorption of small holdings by wealthy landholders. The time of this session is remarkable. 1897. Second, and related to this point, the farmland rental market is well established in Canada. Presently, a bit north of 30% of the farmland is in the rental market, and our research suggests that the majority of this rented land is not owned by active farmers, at least as established through interview with farmers asking about who their landlord is. Farmers benefit from renting in land. Renting allows them to get up to scale without putting all of their investment in land. Non-farmers engaged in the rental market appear to be interested in holding farmland as an investment that has a return in both rents and potential land appreciation. Importantly, our research suggests that the majority of these non-farmer landlord renters are Canadians. In a 2000 survey of 207 farmers in southern Ontario, only 1% of farmers identified their landlords as foreign. This is a rather crude approach to doing this, and the data discussions that you had earlier, and perhaps we'll touch on later, I'd be happy to talk about this some more. Hence, investment in farmland and speculation on farmland values appear to be of far more interest to Canadians than foreigners. This low figure parallels data from the United States. Specifically, the U.S. Department of Agriculture identifies less than 2% of U.S. forest and farmland as being owned by foreign investors. It may be of interest to note that the country of origin with the highest ownership interest in the United States farm and forest land is Canada. In Ontario, for example, and I'd like to turn to some policy discussion, there are no restrictions on ownership of farmland. However, there are tax implications. Foreign owners of farmland are not eligible for the significant tax break on farmland that are afforded to Canadian citizens. Other provinces, for example, Quebec, have more restricted policies that generally seek to limit to control who can own foreign farmland. Often foreign ownership of farmland is limited. These efforts may place downward pressure on farmland prices to the extent that they diminish demand. However, to the extent that these policies significantly offset the fundamental macro drivers that we both discussed, this is unclear to me. According to FCC data, Farm Credit Canada, for the year 2015, Quebec farmland increased by nearly 10%, while Ontario farmland appreciated by 7%. I'm prepared to discuss a range of additional policies issues, including zoning, green belts, and generally to discuss data collection needs as well. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. You know, our mandate for our Agriculture and Forestry Committee has been sent to us by the Senate. Senators of this committee are very interested in the future. When a country is well fed, it does not concern itself with who feeds it. There are no issues in supermarkets at the moment because we know that there is plentiful supply. But what of tomorrow? Who will produce tomorrow and who will own the lands tomorrow? Will it be the farmers themselves or will it be farm workers? That is one of the concerns that we have here around the table with regards to farmland transfer and acquisition, be they ancestral or familial. And so what you have said comforts us. Senator Mercer.
Chair and gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Both interesting presentations. Mr. Deaton, you talked a bit about land rental, and presently a bit north of 30% of farmland is in the rental market. Your research suggests. Is how much land is that? How many acres? How many hectares are we talking?
I don't know. The reference to that is in Statistics Canada, and it's in the report that you'll have, and you would just go and get, I can't remember exactly how many acres of farmland that Stat Canada reports, but you'd be able to multiply that figure. A little more detail on that figure, I think it's roughly 21% of that is in private land, and then 13% of that land is rented out by government.
Is this something you think we should be worried about?
What
that more farmland is now in the rental market as opposed to being directly owned by the farmers.
No,
Well, that's a simple answer. Um, um, uh, is that answer based on the fact that it keeps the land in production as opposed to the opposite of taking land out of production?
It's not clear to me that these aren't mutually beneficial arrangements. Especially we find in one of the reports that you will have, when we get to larger and larger farmers who are primarily responsible for the large amount of food production that's in the grocery stores, they tend to increasingly rent in more land. My sense of what's going on there is that this affords them the opportunity to invest a large amount of their wealth holdings in land, but get up to even higher amounts of scale when necessary through renting in land, and then potentially not have all their eggs in that basket.
Okay, thank you, Trey.
Thank you, Senator Mercer, Senator Enverga. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I've learned so much things about the farmlands, and actually, I see that both of you have concerns about the availability and the cost of farmlands due to land speculation. My question is, should the government legislate a law to control or discourage land speculation to protect new or real farmers, at the same time to create food security and promote low cost of food? Do you think we should create a law for this? I mean, is there something we can do as a government so that land will be available for farmers? And maybe to control encroachment of urban areas to our farmlands. Is there something that we can do? We should do.
Maybe there are laws currently. Most farmland in Ontario, for example, would be zoned for agriculture use. That would be under the municipality to change the use of that land for a non-agriculture purpose. There are also Greenbelt Acts, like the one that surrounds Toronto, that in theory are designed to ensure that that farmland near urban areas stays in and remains in agriculture use. So those are the kind of so there are land policies that are in place right now that identify land in agriculture, and there are policies that attempt to strengthen them. So are you asking if there should be a federal?
Yeah, federal law. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think it would depend. I don't think I know, unless I knew exactly what the law you were putting forward, I'd be able to answer that in a way that would be illuminating.
You get the...
Well, my colleague mentioned that Quebec has some very strict rules on land ownership. They also have relatively strict rules when it comes to land development. So could it be relevant to legislate to make sure that our land is protected and the farmland is only used for farming? Definitely. Should we guarantee access to farmland for new farmers? Well, we could probably put in place means to facilitate younger farmers so they can get established. Now, when it comes to actually putting in place laws that would limit the way farmers do transactions of lands between each other, I'm very not convinced about that.
How about this people who are buying farmlands, but they never use it? I mean, have you seen something like this? I mean, should we be controlling this kind of land speculation?
What I have seen were cases of people that actually invested in farmland as a retirement plan. So when it comes to buying farmland to farm in the future, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But probably we could have ways to make sure that this farmland is currently being used and rented out until those people are actually ready to take it to full-time agriculture.
I'm not aware of the magnitude of that data. Much of the land is that's owned by, let's say, purchased by institutional investors, is then leased out or rented to other farmers. So,
thank you, Senator Wu.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. both of you for your really interesting presentations, and I see a nice intersection of the issues brought up by each of you. But I want to establish with some clarity your positions on a number of issues and some of the underlying principles to help us address the specific question that this committee is looking at, which is the escalation in farmland prices and what's causing it. So on the first question, causes of increases in farmland, I think Professor Deaton, I think you're quite clear in saying that it's multifactorial and low interest rates as well as rising commodity prices play the bulk of the role perhaps in the increase in farmland prices, with a smaller attribution to, regional diversity and so on. I wasn't as clear from Professor Theriault. I'd love to hear your view on what in fact is causing the rise in farmland prices. The related question, of course, is the role of institutional investors in, number one, either being a major cause of farmland price increases. I think Professor Deaton is quite clear on this, that they didn't play a major role, but I'd like to get a clarity on this question. And related to that, whether you think institutional investors perform a function in providing the sort of capital requirements for, very capital-intensive agriculture, increasingly capital-intensive agriculture. The related question to institutional investors, of course, is foreign investors, foreign institutional investors, and whether or not you see a role for these players in our agricultural market and the extent to which they already are players in Canadian agriculture. Again, Professor Deaton, you've given us kind of an estimate, a very low estimate of foreign investors, whereas Professor Theriault, in your op-ed, you seem to be very much against foreign investors. I'd like to understand the basis for that opposition, based first of all on current estimates of what foreign investment is in the country, and why you worry about, if I can put it this way, the color of money, when I'm more focused on keeping land in farmland production and making sure that farmers are farming the land, whoever owns it.
When it comes to causes for farmland value, I totally share my colleagues' arguments on low interest rate, good grain prices, and I did talk about the quota effect for Quebec and Ontario, where producers had a chance to invest in farmland. To answer your question about foreign institutional investors, it's not as much as I do not believe in foreign or as you mentioned, the color of money. It is more a case of Canada having a Nordic type agriculture, and I really don't see it as being as interesting as other countries that can produce year round when it comes to investing in farmland from farm investors' perspective. Now, institutional investors, whether they're local or domestic or foreign, I think will have the same ultimate goal. If there is return to be made on farmland, the temptation for investment will be there. So in the end, I think the result will be the same, whether they're local institutional investors or foreign institutional investors.
Why do you say the need to fight foreign capital, though? Maybe the English translation is bad in the La Presse op-ed, but in the last paragraph, you talk about the need to fight foreign capital.
Well, I meant it as a way where farmland should be used to feed people.
Agreed.
And therefore, if we have farmland in Canada, it should be used to feed Canadians. Now, if foreign investors are to invest and lease out land to Canadians, my argument does not hold anymore.
Voilà.
I agree. Merci. And we use agricultural land, of course, to feed all sorts. We export a large amount of our agriculture product. It's important. So maybe I didn't agree with that part. We use our agricultural land and the entrepreneurial way that farmers pursuing their interest have done that in a way that's been beneficial to them and I think to our country as a whole.
Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, Senator Senator Dagenet.
Now on to Senator Dagenet. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. My question is for Mr. Theriault. You spoke about the opportunity to sell one's land in order to benefit from capital whilst retaining the permission to grow crops on it. It's a temporary and renewable permission. Have you profiled those who would be interested in this kind of investment, selling their land for capital and then renting the land? Do you think that this will be speculative over time? I don't have the profile of of the investors who will buy the land. In my experience, those who want to enter into this agreement is people for whom their future is not guaranteed, and so they will try to divest themselves from a part of their company for their retirement whilst continuing to produce. Someone who comes at the beginning of their 60s could be happy with renting their land for 20 years, even though some people think it's eternal. So, I mean, a producer who could one day become a senator, who knows? Well, thank you, in any case, for your answer. In the region in which I worked a number of years ago, I knew a number of farmers who did such a thing. They sold their lands, but they kept the right to grow and farm. It's good for their retirement, but it wasn't a guarantee for the next generation. There are also inverse examples where farmers stop producing because there is not a next generation. They will rent out their land to other farmers. Thank you very much, Tario. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Desjardins. Now, on to Senator Tardif. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A number of my questions have already been asked, but I would like to touch back upon a comment that we heard from representatives from a Quebec organization about the next generation of farmers that proposed a system of priorities for selling farmland. First of all, the land will be sold as a priority to the next generation, and then to people who farm currently, and then to other potential stakeholders. Do you believe that this kind of system would be efficient in Canada?
I think it runs the risk of not being efficient in the sense that a competitive buyer might be more productive. And in the bidding process, since you're guaranteeing it to the next generation, if they are not more productive than the person bidding than they would have otherwise had the land, then from the definition maybe of efficiency, then being maximizing net benefits, then I don't think it would be efficient from that standpoint.
Monsieur Thériault?
Si on regarde l'entreprise agricole,
if you see a farm like a business, then there may be a reduction in efficiency if we prioritize 100% the next generation. That being said, if we prioritize those who are producing now compared to other stakeholders, then perhaps. But why wouldn't a current farmer have the same chance as someone who wants to start farming? That is a sub-question that is raised by what the organization you mentioned said. So you do not support this position. That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Tardif. Senator Gagné. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentations. Both of you referred to public policy. And as a Senate committee, we would like there to be recommendations. We would like to make recommendations to the government. Mr. Thériault, in your article in La Presse, in the last paragraph, you mentioned that it would be important to have a national agricultural strategy that is clear and effective. Could you describe national agricultural policies that would be, in this case, effective? Well, I see that my past is catching up with me. Some provinces have enacted a number of rules as a framework to farmland acquisition. What I wanted to say is that without entering in provincial jurisdiction, a direction should be taken at a national level to better tailor or better harmonize legislation from one province to the next. In Ontario, anyone can buy land, whereas in Quebec there are restrictions on the land area and one's residency status, as is the case in PEI. In the last paragraph of my article, had to do with the fact that if federal wants to have its say in farmland acquisition, it should be part of a collegial approach in order to try and harmonize provinces so that at least there could be a general basis between provinces. Thank you.
Mention policy issues, and you did say that you were probably prepared to discuss a range of additional policy issues, including zoning, green belts, and data collection needs. Briefly, could you give us your view on these additional policy issues?
Well, the point about zoning is I think I kind of touched on it earlier, but that one of the policies that will determine whether land remains in agriculture, regardless of who the landowner is the underlying zoning, which is changed typically at the municipal level, but there are provincial overrules of that. So that's important to keep in mind, because you can have changing ownership of farmland, but the underlying zoning of how land can be used can remain the same. So it's a dimension of policy. And that's, of course, related to something like the green belt. It's important to keep in mind that the majority of people do live in cities. There are tremendous agglomeration effects of cities, and so that those is natural in some sense that those places would want to and near to transform farmland into urban housing. And so that's always something to consider as well, the value of the farm versus the value in near urban areas of it in housing, for example. The issue that I do think is very important, because it has raised concerns, and people, when there isn't really good data on something like foreign ownership of farmland and forest land, as there is in the United States, people start to speculate quickly on what that might be. I cannot say with certainty that I know what that is. I can say that in the United States, where they collect data, foreign ownership is very, very small, with Canadians being the largest foreign owner. And I do think one role of policy might be to support the clear collection of data in this regard to clarify these issues, and so we can address them if they become more concerning.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Gagné. Now, on to Senator Bayak.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My question was very similar to Senator Gagnon. I wondered if you could tell me what your ideas were for the framework for the federal government to work with the provinces and municipalities to develop that. Did you see a committee or a task force?
Just to clarify, with respect to collecting data?
No, with a strategy for land use. The provinces control it right now, and the municipalities, and you both suggested a federal government role in a framework.
I don't recall that I did.
Oh, I'm sorry. The last one, when Senator Gagnon asked you about your policies. Okay, so I'll leave it to Mr. Ontario then. How do you see the framework working?
I would see it as a form of task force. I think it would be important that provinces agree on the level of control, if we can call it control, they want to establish. Definitely preserving farmland for farming should be the top priority in the end, and limit urban expansion up to a point, and then look at maybe land ownership, because I'm a strong believer that one of the main drivers of farmland prices are the farmers.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bex. Now, Senator Ho.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. I had to be at another meeting, and so I'm late. Yeah, Mike, I have a question for you. Maybe you both could give me some feedback. I was told there is a pilot project going to be happening in Ontario to grow rice for locals and also for export, re-export to Asia. Yeah. So if there's a pilot project going on in Ontario for helping, I was told the climate here and certain part in northern part of China, the climate are very similar, and they believe the rice will grow well in Ontario. So for local consumption, majority will be for re-export. So what is your opinion on that?
I'm not familiar with that project, but I will say that Canada exports agriculture products to China all the time, and I would basically view it within a similar context. The idea of experimenting with new crops that might be profitable to farmers is great, but I'm not familiar with that project. So
I'm not familiar with the initiative either, but I must agree with my colleague where Canada is an important exporter of food commodities, and as such, if it's possible to grow rice for exports.
So do you agree that, the cooperation on agriculture development will be good for our export and food production?
I'm not familiar enough with the issue to actually make a clear statement on it, so I will abstain.
in a similar position.
Okay, I'll get back to you for more details. Thank you.
Notamment, j'ai quelques
I've a couple of questions that are germane to the subject, in my opinion. We know that Quebec, for example, and PEI have laws that protect farmland. They have the strictest laws in that respect. In the 80s, I was in a different parliament, and I participated in the construction and suggestions to this law in question. There was certain provisions in this law, farming dezoning, and so through regional municipalities themselves can ask that there be permission for urban sprawl to happen. The worst enemy of agriculture in urban centres is, in this case, urban sprawl. Montreal, for example. Montreal has reached Saint-Hyacinthe now. It's the same in Toronto. It's the same in Vancouver as well. The worst enemy of farmland is urban sprawl. We talked about Canadian guidelines. Would that not be the Government of Canada's role to come into agreement with provinces in order to limit as much as possible urban sprawl? We would save service costs, and we'd also serve very good farmland. For example, in Beauport, I built a house in 1986. I was the only person surrounded by a field of cows. But my daughter, who was 4 at the time, enjoyed going to see the cows. It was excellent farmland, and now there are about 400 houses around mine, with a primary school also. Will this ever end? And then Quebec still boasts that it has the strongest law, but the results simply aren't there. When you look at Quebec, when you look at the big cities in Canada, Montreal and Toronto, it's very striking in Toronto because Toronto keeps sprawling. When you fly into Toronto, you see this sprawl. And so, with the collaboration with provinces, without imposing anything upon them, could the federal government come to an agreement with provinces with this kind of law?
It seems to me that, to some extent, that's a question that you're in the best position to answer. But let me make some, could the federal government do this with the province hand in hand? Let me make some observations that might be useful in thinking about the question of urban sprawl that also need to be on the table. There's the one hand and then the other hand. So when you fly into Toronto, you see urban sprawl. But when you fly out of Toronto and look down, you see lots and lots of farmland. And it's often shocking. So the majority of people, roughly 90% of the people, are living in the urban areas, and they are at the fringe. So they see development and sprawl as an intense issue. But there is a fair amount of farmland, and one way to also think about it is that You know, if you I don't get the figures wrong, but at some time in the 1920s, you would have had more farmland and you would have had way more farmers. And from that time to this time, you have much higher production at about 2% of the population in agriculture, and they're in the cities. The implications, whatever you decide is appropriate, there are always, winners and losers associated with this. If you, say, conserve farmland at the fringe through a directive, then the farmers, for example, who may see a diminution in land values may be the losers. And to the extent that it has effect on land prices in urban areas, that's also something that needs to be looked into.
Oui, mais je vous rappelle une chose, professeur.
I would like to remind you one thing, Professor Deaton. Farming is very mechanized and has been very mechanized for the past 50 years with, therefore, an accelerated production. And so you can have the same amount of production in less land, but you will no longer be able to remove buildings that already exist. You cannot use highways, and you can't destroy highways to create farmland. And so, whether we want it or not, urban sprawl removes productive farmland. This is a concern to our committee, because what will happen in 10, 15, 20 years, that is what the senators are thinking about. Young people already find it hard to buy farmland because of a variety of situations. Speculation, for example. Farmland transfer, as another example. Then, on top of that, they have even less arable land to work with. I don't know if you saw that all federal government scientists came before us to say there are lands that are from Category 1 to Category 7, and there is a lot of Category 7 land in Canada. This is a concern. We have to send a report, to the government where we will translate the concerns of the farming industry. As of course, people aren't descending in the streets necessarily all the time to talk about agriculture, because at the moment there is no shortfall in farm. But the second you can't find carrots in the supermarket, then there will be riots in the streets, and it'll be too late, because there will be no more land to cultivate carrots, for example. And so what we're doing today is working for the future, and we have to work for the future, and we will table a report to the government, and the government will have to take it into consideration, and respond. And it's thanks to people, to you, who do continual research, continue to shout out about it, because people need to be aware of what's going on. Thank you very much for your witness evidence. Senator Wu? Very quickly, Senator Wu.
It's a follow-up from the chair's statement, and it reflects a kind of a premise or an underlying thesis that's been going through many of the witness testimonies and questions coming from this committee. And that premise is that there's going to be 9 billion people in this world by mid-century. We won't be able to feed them. Canada may have to be self-sufficient because there won't be enough carrots or some other crop and vegetable. Can you speak to this issue of, can we feed the world? Is there enough agricultural production to feed the world now? Is that really the issue that we need to worry about, or is it some other kind of distribution issue or marketization issue? Please, this is a big question, but it's very central to many of the underlying questions that we've been going through here.
Well, with the increased yield and technology that we have, I think producing enough food to feed 9 billion people will not be the issue. I think the issue relies in the market access for those people. Can we get the food to the market, and can we get the consumers to the market?
I agree with that. I think it will also depend on the trust trade relationships between countries in order to get to those countries that have shortfalls of food. And that'll be an important aspect along with the production, perhaps even the hardest one.
Merci infiniment, messieurs.
Many thanks, gentlemen. Safe trip home.